Hey everyone, how is it going? So today we are continuing on with chess endgames. Last episode we looked at opposition, do recommend you check it out as it's super important. Today we're just looking at all the other kind of king and pawn style endgames. As always, if you like this kind of thing, please subscribe, it really helps the channel grow. But yeah, let's just dive right into it. First thing we're going to look at is something known as the body check. That's where we're using our king to very much limit the movement of their king, and hopefully get our pawn across to the end and promote. Now let's have a little look at it in practice. So it's white to move, and we move down to the g3. Now you can see the king is controlling these three squares here, very much limiting the movement of the black king. Pretty much nowhere he can move, so he comes across to the g1, and that allows us to just slowly start moving our pawn forwards towards its end goal. He continues across, and then once again we can continue moving our pawn. Now let's just say he starts trying to swing around up this way. Well, we can go for the second body check, move into the f4, and control these squares. Again, limiting the movement of this king. He doesn't really have anywhere else to go, so he can try swinging round again. Well, anytime he tries swinging round, we could just go for the body check. Once again, controlling the squares in front, limiting black's movement, and allowing us to kind of start moving up and slowly coming across to capture this pawn. You can see the king is working in both an attacking mode and defensive mode at the same time. Now king can't really do too much, so just so he comes back to here, we can push the pawn forwards, and again, what is he going to do? Not too much. And we can now start moving in towards our end goal of just capturing that pawn. And from here, there is nothing black can do. Just to speed it up a little bit to show you how it's going to play out. Boom. And we should win from here, assuming you don't do something absolutely catastrophic and give away an accidental stalemate, but you should definitely win. Now, just to show you why the body check is so important, let's move back to, just say, this position. So, he has moved round to here, and instead of going for the body check, like before, like so, we decide to move the pawn forwards. You probably saw that analysis bar just drop all the way down, and this game is going to end up in a stalemate. The reason for that is, he can now move in and start controlling these squares. Our initial plan of kind of swinging around to capture is now gone. He's now controlling the squares. So we move up to here, and he can move up, again controlling the squares. All we can do is start moving back, and he can start moving in on us. Now have a little look at this position. Where's our king going to go? Well, you can see by the dots the legal moves that he can make. Any of these moves means that we're going to lose our pawn. If we move back to here, we can still salvage a stalemate by going for opposition. Check out my last video. If we move to somewhere like here, he can then take, and now he can body check us the entire way down and go for the promotion, completely losing position. So that basically is just to show you in practice why it is so important to always go for the body check. If he starts moving around, we move up and control the squares. Now, next thing we're going to look at is something called triangulation. This is where we move our king around in a certain kind of pattern to kind of force black into a bad position. So you can see from here, we have the two pawns. He has the one pawn, and what we want to try and do eventually is to get into there, capture the pawn, and promote. Obviously, we can't do that at the moment, so we need to use triangulation. So our plan of action is to end up back on this square here, because clearly we want to try and get into there, but we need to do it when the king isn't kind of controlling this area here. So what we're going to do is just kind of work around these squares until we can finally hop back into position. So we'll move across to the e5, he moves back to the f8, and we can then move down to the f4. Looks like we're retreating. If he decides to move straight in like so, then we could just hop right up, and now we're controlling the squares. He has to move his king, he moves back, we can jump in, and nothing he can do, we're going to grab the pawn and we're going to promote. It may not be as quick as that, so we might just end up kind of dancing around this kind of area for a bit. So let's just say he goes to the e8, we can then jump across to the e4. If he comes back like so, then we can just go across to the e5. And you can see we're just kind of jumping around like so. If he does end up back here, perfect for us, we jump back into our original square, force him to move back, and like I say, this is a completely winning endgame. So he comes across like so, we grab the pawn, he goes to the corner. Now, be careful in this position. I'd recommend moving back, then pushing up the pawns. If you do move to here, he goes to there, you go to there, then he moves back. You have to be a bit more careful in this position. Retreat the king, because if you do anything else, let's just say you move the pawn, that's a stalemate. His king has nowhere to move now. So just retreat your king back. If he comes down like so to take that pawn, that's fine. We're going to promote anyway, and there's nothing he can do. Checkmate. Now, just going to quickly look at something known as the square rule. This is like a visualization tool that you can use to just quickly work out if a pawn can promote before the king catches up to it. What we're going to do is we're going to draw a square from the piece to the end of the board where it needs to get to. So we draw a line like that, 4 squares, so we do 4 squares like that, and we can then draw our square. So here we have the square. If it was just say black's turn and he was able to move into the square, he would then be able to capture the pawn. If it's white's turn and the king is out of the square, then we're going to be able to promote. So just to show you this in practice, we know our square is around here and it's white to move. Now, because the king isn't moving into the square first, we are now able to promote. There we are, we've managed to promote and he can't get to us in time. We're going to win the game. Just to show you from this position, if the pawn was 1 square across, you can now see that the king is inside of that square. It's still white to move, but as we move, there is pretty much nothing we can do. That black king is going to catch up and capture the piece. Now, like I say, this also applies to when it is black to move and they're moving inside of the square. Now we can see, once again, here's the square, same as before. Black to move, he's now moving inside of it. And he can now catch up to us. So just seeing how it plays out. Again, same as before. Boom, stalemate. And it's just always worth keeping that in mind. Just drawing that little square in your head to work out if you can promote or not. So it's from the piece to the edge of the board and making a square like so. Now, removed passed pawns. This is where we can use the square rule in practice. Now you can see we have 1 passed pawn that's going to try and get to the end. However, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can see that the king is inside of the square. We can actually use this to our advantage. Now he has 3 pawns here against our 2. These 2 pawns aren't going to stand a chance, but we can use this pawn as a distraction technique to try and bring our king across to kind of just go and tidy up the area a little bit there. Now, as we know, our plan is to use this pawn as a distraction technique to get his king away, so we can just come across and gobble, gobble, gobble up all of these pawns. And you can go either way. You can either start by pushing the pawn or start by moving the king. Either's absolutely fine. If we just say it with the pawn, he sees it and he starts kind of closing into the area. We can start moving our king across and he starts moving in. Just say we move the pawn a little bit further. He moves in. Don't worry about that pawn. That pawn's a lost cause. We're using him as the distraction technique so we can start moving in. If he does say take the pawn, we can move in like so. And it's pretty much game over for him here. All we need to do from here is just gobble up his pawns and use our king to just keep body checking him. Stockfish recommends him pushing down the g5, but again, it makes absolutely no difference whether he brings the king in or starts going down with the pawns. If he starts, bringing in his king, we can then just gobble, 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 like so. And yeah, we are going to completely win this. We can start pushing in now. He starts moving his king. And yeah, there is nothing he can do. You can see we are controlling this area with our king. He can't do anything about it. He can go up, he can go down, makes no odds. Maybe he'll start coming down, trying to capture this. Makes no difference to us, because he's not going to get there in time. We promote and we just go ahead and win the game. Now, we're going to look at something called reverse tempo. This is a kind of strategic concept where the player kind of intentionally makes a very low tempo kind of move to actually gain a winning position. It'll make more sense as I show it. Now, you can see from this position, we have the 2 kings kind of here, neither of which can move. If one king was to move out of the way, the other king is just going to gobble up the other pawn and then be able to shoot down towards the end there. And it will be the same, just say, if Black's king had to move. If he was to move to just say there, we'd be able to gobble it up. Same for there, there, or there. So neither player wants to move their king at the moment, but we have these pawns here. Now we're going to use a low tempo move to kind of force him to move this king. And how are we going to do that? Now we're not going to move the 2 squares up to the A4, because once he moves the pawn down, we now have to move our king. And you can see, again, if we move our king anywhere, he's just going to go ahead and grab it, and we are in a terrible position. If we just move it through 1 space to the A3, and he moves the 1 space, we can move again. Now he has to move his king out of the way. And it doesn't matter where he moves his king, we are in a completely dominating position. So let's just say he moves back to the D6, we can gobble up the pawn, and just say he moves across to here on the C5. Don't start moving the pawn yet. Remember to use opposition and the body blocks, and just come across like so. We are now controlling this area here. He now has to move his king, so he can move either way. Let's just say he goes up to the C6, and we can move across to the E6. If he tries closing in, that is absolutely fine. We can start moving up the pawn, and just by doing this, we are slowly but surely getting the pawn to the end, and we're going to win the game. And just for those of you wondering why I didn't go ahead and capture that pawn, because I know someone was probably wondering it, let's just say he goes to there, and then we move the king across, and he comes down to capture this pawn. We can just move the king out of the way, protecting off this side, and if he takes the pawn, there's then nothing to stop us from shooting this pawn up. We're going to win the race. We can keep going like so, and if he does try kind of closing in on it, we can move up. He can't get his pawn down before we get our pawn up, and we're just going to end up gobbling up that pawn and winning the game anyway. So just thought I'd clear that up, just because I know someone's probably going to ask. And finally, we're just going to look at the importance of having an extra pawn in the endgame. A lot of people do just give up their pawns very, very easily, but they're so key, and when it comes to an endgame, that extra pawn is the difference between winning and losing. Now, looking at this position, you can see we have 3 pawns here, he has the 3 here, but over on this side, it's the 1 pawn against our 2. Now, Black does have a much more active king, so first thing we need to be doing is getting our king into action. So just moving it across to the F1 and looking at starting to centralise that king. Now we'll just play out a few moves from here. So he brings down his king to the C6, we start bringing it up to the E2, and he comes down to the C5. Now we can see he's going to have plans of bringing his king around like so to try and gobble up our pawns. So just pushing forwards and controlling this area here. It's all about controlling the area and dominating the space. Not too much he can do apart from start bringing his king around to the D4, and we can now move into opposition with the king, now controlling all of this area. Now if he starts making a break with his pawn, just say the H5, what we want to do is to just close off the position, stop him from advancing his pawns any further. Again, if he does it with the F5, close off the position, stop him from moving any further. And again, just say he starts bringing down his A5 pawn, once again, push up, close off the position, and from here, we're kind of forcing him to move his king a little bit now. So just see he starts going in for the kill, to come around and start gobbling up our pawns. So he moves across to the E4, we can now move up to the C3, he comes down to the F3, and from here, we can start launching our attack. So, push up, get him to take, we can take back, and there is nothing stopping this pawn from advancing forwards. Yes, he can start gobbling up our pawns, but we are going to win this race. We are completely winning. We can gobble up all of these pawns here, easy peasy. Keep getting the checks, slowly grabbing up the pawns, and then we can just close in with our king and the queen, grab the checkmate. Right, well, I hope that was helpful. That is kind of all the kind of core concepts and principles that you really need to know in a king-pawn endgame. Check out the other video on opposition, as it does directly relate to this. I'm going to be covering all the other types of endgames, and then at the end of it, I'll probably compile it all together into one super long video for anyone that's interested. As always, if you like it, please subscribe, really helps the channel grow. But yeah, you guys go off, have some fun, play some chess, and I'll catch you on the next one.